You are listening to From Sobriety to Recovery with Jesse Mogul. Let's get to the show. Welcome back to From Sobriety to Recovery. I am your host, Jesse Mogul. I am in addiction recovery, and I am recovering from an amazing trip to New Orleans, home of the infamous Bourbon Street. So for those of you who are not familiar with Bourbon Street, it is, to me, the second most debauchery street in the United States of America, second only to Las Vegas Boulevard. And the big difference between the two, obviously there are many, but to me, subjective to my perspective, the biggest difference is while they both have high levels of alcohol and drug use on their major thoroughfare, Las Vegas Boulevard and Bourbon Street, one is ridiculously dirty and disgusting, and the other one is less ridiculously dirty and disgusting. At least all around Las Vegas Boulevard, it is opulence and wealth and really pretty things. In Bourbon Street, all around it is very historical. Vegas has very little history. They knock all theirs down and build on top of the ruins, whereas Bourbon Street and the French Quarter very much so hold on to that historical aspect, so everything looks very old and worn down and beaten. And of course, the way people treat that city clearly, at least in that general area, when they start getting intoxicated, pretty much shows that they behave the way they see the environment. And so it is a ruckus to go down there. And I have been to Vegas a handful of times since I got sober, but to go down to Bourbon Street, knowing my history with that street, I did back-to-back Mardi Gras in 2000 and 2001, where me and my friends who went decided that it was our job to take all of the ecstasy and LSD and inhale and snort everything that we could possibly get our hands on. And that was a pretty rough trip. Went down there for a Florida Gator game one time, blacked out by 1 o'clock. Went there for a jazz fest one time, tried to buy drugs in a bar that led me to an alley that led me to getting a knife pulled on me. And remarkably, the mugger only took the $60 he needed for the drugs that he was telling me he would come back with, that he never did come back with. But even though I pulled out my entire wallet and he could see all the money I had, he still only took the $60 he needed for presumably the drugs he wanted that he had no intentions of ever bringing back to me. So those were the four that I could remember. It took me a little time to remember the Florida Gator one on the trip, but I definitely remembered those four very vividly. I think there may have been a fifth, but that's how much I used to drink, is that I'm not quite sure there was a fifth. So we'll go with this time being the fifth. And to say that it was a completely unique experience unto itself would be a gross simplification because when you go to a place known for debauchery, known for excess and loudness, then there's certainly a completely unique experience that will come from that when you are one of the people traipsing up and down that street sober. And while I have very little experience with Music Row, I believe it's Broadway in Nashville, that is another accumulation of a lot of bars in a very small area. So if you've ever been to Nashville and you've done Music Row, Broadway, which is right outside of the arena where their hockey team plays, I have been let out of a couple concerts smack dab in the middle of that chaos. And there aren't nearly the street performers that you will find on Bourbon Street with the drumsticks and the buckets and the band music. And it is a cacophony of sights and sounds. And unfortunately, most of the smells are rather repugnant, but they are definitely overwhelming. And if you haven't had a chance to go to Bourbon Street and you're new to your sobriety recovery journey, I would recommend you probably postpone that a little while longer, because you really want to make sure that you are very firm in your grounding when you go to a city that perpetuates excess in the way that Bourbon Street and the French Quarter do. And mind you, I mean, it's the tourists going there that sort of increase the level of all of this. I mean, the street performers and the vagrants and everybody there, they flock to that region specifically because they know the tourists come there to act the fool. And it's something very interesting that we're going to go into in this episode, because I've got some really cool takeaways that I was able to gather up while I was smack dab in the middle of this chaos. Because when you see it from a perspective of long-term recovery, there's a sheen, a shine, maybe sheen's the right word, a sheen to what you want to experience, and then the reality of what you do experience. And it reminds me very much of the boardwalk that connects Santa Monica to Venice Beach. I, of course, live there for a baker's dozen, so I've been down to that area many times. Hollywood to Santa Monica can be quite a drive in traffic, but it's still nonetheless the closest beach that you would find accessible on a regular basis. So I had done the walk from Santa Monica to the Venice boardwalk many, many times. And I would tell the tourists who would ask me about where to go, and when I tell them to go down to Venice, I would often say what I'm getting ready to say to you, which is when you're leaving Santa Monica and you're walking through Venice the first time, just notice what you notice. How pretty everything seems, and how sunny, and just typical Los Angeles, big huge beaches and lots of sunshine, and there's music coming from all the bars, and there's people out playing, and it generally has this warmth and almost this sweet elegance to it. Then I tell them, when you walk past the Gold's Gym and you basically get to the end of the boardwalk, and then you walk past all the shops and the people, and you start heading towards the Venice Pier, you'll probably feel the intuition to turn around because there's not much more to see. And so when you turn around and you go back through the Venice boardwalk area, I want you to be very keenly aware of what you're noticing now. And whenever you do this, I want you to come back and I want you to tell me the difference between when you walked through it the first time and when you turned around at the pier and walked back through it. And I would give them no inclination for the answer that I wanted, just simply asking them for their observations when they came back. Because I was a hotel, I knew I'd see them because I was the breakfast bartender waiter, so I knew I would see them the next morning. And sure enough, they come in and they say, the first time through, it really did have that exquisite Los Angeles elegance to it. But whenever you turned around at the pier and you walked back through, it's like then all of a sudden we saw the drugs and the addiction and the alcohol abuse and the young people walking around begging for money. And it was completely different. Having gone through it once, turning around, it really was like you got to see the whole place without the rose-colored glasses. And I tell you this story because for Bourbon Street, it very much can have that same feel. You'll be walking around and seeing the elegance of the history and the historical street signs that are on the side of the walls talking about when the Spanish occupied it for 50 years. And it's just like there's this rich depth of history that New Orleans has that most of our cities in the United States don't have, or at least don't highlight as well as New Orleans does. Certainly there are those in the Northeast that we have had for quite some time. And if you've ever been to St. Augustine, the oldest continuous city in the United States, although it was run by the Spanish for quite some time, ironically enough, so was New Orleans for about 50 years. In fact, little known fact, most of the architecture you're seeing, like 99.9% of it, is actually Spanish. And there are only 3 original French buildings still in existence down there because of these massive fires that happened in 1788 and 1784. So talk about pulling some random trivia out of my ass right now. Anyways, I say this about the Bourbon Street experience because while there is that sort of gleam of historical references all around, it is very much a dark area from my point of view, with the alcohol and with the drinking and with the homelessness and everything. And I was able to see it through eyes of someone who has lived in Los Angeles and experienced their homelessness for 13 years. And since, 2001, 2000 for the Mardi Gras, and 2004 for the Florida game, I have experienced a lot more of life. And addiction is definitely, brought me to my knees. And so seeing a city where so many people have been brought to their knees by addiction, I started to really ask myself, what is happening around me that I am now more aware of? And where can I open up my perceptions to become even more aware of the things that I believe I'm aware of? And it can sound like a bit of a riddle, but I didn't want to look at everybody, whether they were the tourists or the locals, with some kind of pity or sorrow as to why do you have to consume so much in order to have fun here. I wanted to, as best as I could, doing a lot of mind reading, figure out what it was, the experiences that were happening around me and how they might be benefiting the people that were currently going through these experiences. Because people don't drink to excess and do the drugs to excess without seeking to gain something from it. Even if what you're trying to do is mute your emotions and hide from your past and not contend with your future and blank out the present, you're still doing it for a purpose and you're doing it for a reason. And so from this came these little tidbits that I would like to share with you today. And then I'm going to interweave some of the topics that we have discussed in the past. Impulse control, instant gratification are going to come up, dopamine, serotonin, they're going to come up again. We're going to be talking about some of the neurotransmitters, and I'm even going to bring up an old topic that I haven't discussed in a while, the triune brain, because I've recently, over the last few months, been doing some research about it, and while many a psychologist and, quote-unquote brain expert will say that they have debunked the myth of the triune brain, there are still some very useful informational nuggets in there about how our brain evolves and why we act the way we do during certain scenes of our lives. So the first thing that I took from the entire trip, besides the fact that you better have some damn good walking shoes if you're going to go there, is that I have to work a bit more to get to that place of uninhibited fun. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm not going to bullshit people who can see through bullshit. And let's face it, as people who have long been in the addiction world and have now begun to journey to sobriety and recovery, we know what it's like to be bullshitted because we spend a majority of our time bullshitting those around us about our condition or what was going on or just what we did last night. So I'm not going to bullshit bullshitters here. I had to work really hard to get to that place of uninhibited fun. Now, by uninhibited, I mean expressing my feelings or my thoughts unselfconsciously and without some level of restraint. When we consume massive amounts of alcohol, we begin to shut off the prefrontal cortex, which is where we are making our rational decisions. And a majority of our behaviors shift to what we have referenced on this show as the emotional ghetto, that amygdala, that limbic system, that thing that's that whole little emotional area that's going on in the middle of your brain. And that's where we find ourselves behaving and just basically coming from a place of pure emotion. This is where we get ourselves into some trouble whenever we have consumed copious amounts of alcohol and drugs. When we are acting upon our emotions, then a song can bring us to uncontrollable laughter or uncontrollable tears. And when you're sober, you have control over your brain's operating system. And things aren't just shifting all the way to the emotional level. They are staying in that cognitive prefrontal cortex area. Now, when we discuss this within the triune brain, that's where we want to be very mindful of knowing that, it talks about the reptilian part of the brain, and then it talks about the emotional center of the brain, and then we get into that primary the prefrontal cortex area of our brain, where we are being able to emotionally regulate ourselves and we're being able to really monitor our rational thought, right? Those primal experiences, that reptilian brain within the triune brain system, which again, if you Google about it, you're going to find that some of it they're trying to debunk here and there. But if we just stay with the basic philosophy of it, that very first part of our brain that develops while we're in the womb is in charge of our primal experiences, where we become very, we do things immediately and we're reactive and we have reflexive responses to the environment, right? I mean, as the brain's developing, it's just coming up with the core functioning power of the brain. So this very beginning stages of our development is where we're beginning to just put together how we're actually going to just function as a brain system. So when you start looking at how the brain may or may not have developed, and you start to really begin to dive into this reptilian brain and this instinctual drive system that we have within us, right, you start to realize that a lot of the decisions that people go off and they make when they're intoxicated can be coming from the reptilian, the stage one. It's the first part of the brain that develops. This is the region, first development. We're talking about in the womb, breathing, heart regulation, basic motor functions. I mean, this is where the instincts of being territorial, where we find our aggression, or where we find our desires to mate, comes from that very beginning stages of our brain's development. As it moves into the second stage of its development, the limbic system, this is where I used to call it mammalian back when I would reference it a long time ago, because I was taught reptilian, mammalian, and then the neocortex, which is where the rational thoughts and all that stuff, and we'll get there in a minute. So you get this limbic system that's very emotional, and this is the second evolutionary layer, if you will, under this triune brain theory, where we get our amygdala, our hippocampus, the hypothalamus, all this sciencey stuff, where basically it plays a crucial role in our emotions, our memory, our motivation. Right? It is involved in the process of regulating our emotions, the formations of our memories, and our sense of reward and punishment. So when you start to ask yourself, why did I behave the way that I did on this alcohol and this drugs for so long? Well, we know through research, we know, not just from my show, but every show out there that will talk about addiction in this way, that when you begin to consume inhibitants, like these vices, these alcohol and these drugs, that we begin to shut down that prefrontal cortex, the rational decision making, and we move our behaviors into the limbic system, that emotional ghetto, if you will. That's what is supposed to be monitoring our emotions. That's what's supposed to be monitoring the formation of our memories and our sense of reward and punishment. So next thing you know, let's take all this I just said over the last 3 minutes and let's drop it down into the middle of Bourbon Street. You got a bunch of people operating on their reptilian and mammalian brains. So we've got people within the reptilian world, they're being territorial. There's a level of aggression, and then there's that instinctual mating that's going on in that portion of the brain. Think about whenever you get super hammered at bars. You got people getting jiggy with it all over each other on the dance floor, right? Aggression, step on somebody's shoes, bump their shoulder. Next thing you know, they want to bow up and get into a brawl. Great. So we can all end up in handcuffs tonight. Sounds like an awesome way for this night to finish. And then, of course, territorial, right? How often is it whenever you find somebody coming into your territory, not just because they might be within your zone of personal space, but maybe they're hitting on your guy or hitting on your girl or coming around all your friends and being weird. Next thing you know, all of a sudden you feel a little bit aggressive and boom, you're in that reptilian brain. Now, let's take the reptilian brain. We've just talked about territoriality. Why would I say it that way? Being territorial, aggression, and mating, and now it's also bringing the limbic system. Regulation of your emotion, formation of your memories, and that sense of reward and punishment. This is where instant gratification and impulse control break down. When we walk away from the front part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex area, right, the part that's supposed to be regulating just our rational thought, like, should I get on top of this car and try to surf down it while my friend drives 80 miles an hour on a country road? Probably shouldn't do that. But you know what? Fuck it. I'm young. I'm stupid. Let's do it anyways. I did that. A buddy named Craig, I'll leave his last name out of it because I haven't talked to him since high school, but he had a car with a bike rack on the top of it. And I remember having a party at my house. There was no alcohol or drugs. This was like junior year, senior year in high school. And it was just a bunch of people came out to the country. And he's like, we should get on the hood of my car and hold on to the bike rack while we speed down the road. And many of us did this while Craig drove. And we all walked away from it perfectly fine. But that seems like a really awesome thing to do at 17 years old when your prefrontal cortex is barely developed. And you're like, I have an idea. Let's jump on the hood of this car and surf down it at 60 miles an hour in the middle of the night on a dark road. Because, you know what, if we hit something, I'm only going to get launched, 600 feet and explode into pieces when I hit that tree, but fuck it. I'm 17. I'm made of rubber. Well, now let's bring this back to Bourbon Street. You've got this limbic system that's all of a sudden you've inhibited it by drinking so much alcohol and taking drugs. Right now, that part of your brain that's going to be monitoring your memories. That's why we wake up the next day foggy with very little recollection of what the hell we did the night before until people start to fill us in. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that. Now, let's also bring in the fact that we aren't regulating our emotions, right? So now anger and rage can show up just as quickly as laughter and fun. Jealousy can come out of left field. Sadness, sorrow, and depression can show up because a song reminds us of something that we're very emotional about. And then, of course, we have that sense of reward and punishment, right? We see more shots as this a reward to increase the level of events of the night, and we don't think about the punishment our body is going to put us through the next day. And this is a street where a majority of the people are existing, which is within this world of the reptilian and mammalian brains, where they're just operating on just straight emotion and go with the flow mentality. And so when I say that I had to work harder to have uninhibited fun, it's because I was in that rational prefrontal cortex a majority of the time. Yeah, we went to a piano bar and we were singing along with stuff, but it wasn't like Jesse on 6 shots and 4 beers. It was Jesse on 7 cups of soda water. So you will have to work harder to allow yourself to just have fun. It's going to be something. To sit here and tell you that it's not would be the biggest load of bullshit ever. I feel like maybe even in the past I tried to say that crap. And for some reason, I don't feel like saying that crap anymore. Fun will not feel the same. If we're looking for similarity here, there is similarities, but the same, it will not occur on 12 shots of Jägermeister versus no shots of Jägermeister. It's going to be different. You are going to have to work to get yourself to a place where you're like, you know what? Let's just have fun. Let's just dance down the street and laugh and sing and high-five random strangers and get into conversations with people that are certainly externally a little bit off and probably even more so on the inside, right? Because drunk Jesse would talk to anybody. Drunk Jesse also got a knife pulled on him right a block off Bourbon Street. Sober Jesse wasn't going to have that happen to him. But when you're intoxicated, yeah, you're dancing down the street. I saw people doing freaking cartwheels and stuff. Hell, we were in the piano bar and some people decided that they were going to take his girlfriend and launch her up in the air like she was a cheerleader, which clearly he was a bass and she was a cheerleader at some point because they did this way too well. They did almost put her head straight into the ceiling, which would have been really devastating for everybody involved, but specifically for her neck and perhaps the paralyzation that would have come afterward. Paralyzation? Let's go with paralysis, Jess. And so clearly, again, another one of those things where it's like people drink and they get uninhibited, and next thing you know, they're just doing things that, yeah, probably not the best idea after many drinks to sit there and try to toss, your girlfriend up in the air like you're still 17 years old and in high school, especially in a bar where there's glassware everywhere, and if she were to fall, that would not end very well. But that's what people do. And so, yeah, I sit there and I laugh and I shake my head like I'm sure as hell not doing anything like that. But I'm not going to frown upon people who want to continue to behave that way. You come to Bourbon Street, you go to Las Vegas Boulevard, you go to Broadway, you go to Spring Break, you go to Key West to do those kinds of behaviors. Whether the locals, not necessarily the ones hustling on the street, but the ones living around there, whether they enjoy it or not, probably would prefer to have a little bit less noise. But at the same time, they understand that this is what you get when you sign up to live on this street or near this street. So you are going to have to work harder to just feel less inhibited. To be uninhibited is not something that you just slide right into whenever you're sober. You have to make that conscious decision to say, you know what, I'm just going to be goofy and have fun and make jokes and laugh, and I'm not going to rely on alcohol or drugs at all to take me to that place. I was able to achieve that for glimmers. Was it a consistency? No. But at the same time, whenever you aren't intoxicated, there will be a consistency to your behavior that you won't have on copious amounts of alcohol and drugs. And I want you to be aware that that is coming for you. And if it's something that you haven't already noticed, then you certainly will now that I've mentioned it. I want every one of y'all to enjoy years and years and years of sobriety and recovery awesomeness. And whether that means that you steer clear of places like Bourbon Street and Las Vegas Boulevard and Broadway and the Keys, that's up to you to decide how grounded you are. I would never tell somebody, you've got to figure this out. You've got to be able to go to a bar. You've got to be able to go to a club. You've got to be able to go to a concert and be around these people because life dictates that you are going to be around them at some point. So get used to it now. That's not something that I would ever say or demand of anyone, because that's ludicrous of me to try to put my life into the shoes of somebody else's. But I did make a very strong point to myself at the very beginning of this journey, back on January 13th of 2017, that I would figure out a way to be able to go to live music and go to clubs and go to bars and go to these places of raucous debauchery and enjoy them. Just do that in a different way. I didn't want to have to stop Jesse from having fun. I just wanted to keep the alcohol and drugs out of his system. Let's figure out a different way to have fun. Certainly by going to Bourbon Street, I was able to really up the ante on that and experience it in just the most intense way possible. Because even in Vegas, you can find yourself in places where people aren't throwing it down 19 ways to Sunday. But on Bourbon Street, I mean, those doors, you're just in and out of them. And it is very easy and very quick to find yourself around people who are absolutely in the throes of a dopamine serotonin rush. Number 2 thing I learned, nobody is paying attention to whether I am drinking or not. This was a huge question I had at the very beginning of this. And in fact, I remember going to those meetings at Kaiser, and it came up in every single one of them. What are people going to think whenever I'm not drinking? What are people going to say? How are people going to ask? What should I respond with when people say, why aren't you drinking? Only once on Bourbon Street at the same piano bar, we spent like 3.5 hours there. We were just totally into these guys playing piano, and there was a drummer even, and it's a sing along. You're at a piano bar, you go to sing along, and lucky for us, I suppose, we knew like all the songs except for like 2. So it was a blast to be there. And this one rando older dude rolled up and started talking to us and asking us where we were from. And, he looked at my cup and he's like, what are you drinking? I'm like, soda water. He's like, that's it? Just soda water? I'm like, yeah, I don't drink. Why not? It's just like, me and alcohol don't get along anymore. Whoa, that's amazing willpower. I was like, yep, 6.5 years of it, I guess. And, just sort of shook his head, and it just started being slightly annoying. But either way, again, he was operating in his limbic system. And so let him be whoever he is and don't get territorial and aggressive, although there's certainly that part of a human in me that just wants to be like, okay, leave me and my girlfriend alone now. We were having a fine enough time singing Billy Joel's Piano Man song for the second time, because when people walk into a piano bar, they want to request that song. How we only heard it twice the whole night is a surprise to me. But back to the story. So this one dude out of all of them, out of all the places that we went, asked, and it was just like, no, man, me and alcohol just don't get along. Like, I don't care at all what he said after that or what he was thinking before, during, or after whenever he approached us. It has no bearing. I don't even remember his face. I just know that he told us he was from Edmonton, Canada. He was obviously like in his 60s. And he was doing whatever he's doing. They were partying, and that's awesome. We were doing it our own way. And I want to stress upon you that even if somebody asks, you can decide how you want to respond. Me and alcohol just don't get along anymore. I was slightly perturbed whenever he called it willpower. I'm like, motherfucker, you have no fucking clue how much work I have put into this. And you just want to whittle it all down to the word willpower. It's like, there is that part of it. There was that part of me that's like, oh, you son of a bitch. You have no idea how little willpower is playing a role in this anymore. But, it is what it is. And people operating in their world are not necessarily going to understand if I tried to explain it, nor was that even the place, right? It's a loud-ass bar while people are playing piano and singing. It was a blast. I freaking loved it. I mean, the only reason we left, it was midnight, was that we'd been there 3.5 hours. We did curfew ourselves at midnight because we knew we had to get up the next day and do a bunch of stuff. And that is another thing about it too, is like, yeah, that drive to be out till 3, 4 in the morning and close down the bars, you're probably not going to be behaving like that whenever you're sober. Certainly we did, I think, was it the first night? I think we were out till like 1. Don't think we got back to the hotel room till about 1. And we were in the hotel room and we were saying, we're tired. We got to get up. We got to do stuff in the morning. And I think it was the Saturday night. Or was it Friday night? I think it was the Friday night. And we were like, nah, let's go down there. We dressed to walk around. Let's go down there. I was hungry, so I wanted a piece of pizza. And so we found the pizza place, and they were like, all right, let's just go listen to some music. And we found a really cool band. And then we went into another bar and found another really cool band. And that was really awesome. And so that did keep us out pretty late. And I could have, stayed out longer. But again, when you're not, sitting there with, a point, 1.6 BAC, then when your body gets tired, like I remember drinking through the tired back when I was a drunk. And whenever you're sober, you don't get to drink through the tired anymore. You certainly could get a cup of coffee if that's what you wanted to do. But again, my brain is like, do you really want to drink coffee at 11 p.m.? You will want to go to bed in the next couple hours. Do you really want caffeine in your system? Fucking prefrontal cortex. So, nobody is paying attention to whether you're drinking or not when you go to places like that. And if they are, just you can say something funny, joke it off, and everything just goes back to the way that it was. The only people who knew on a consistent basis that I wasn't drinking were my girlfriend and I and the bartender. That's it. Only the bartender knew that every single time I was reaching over to that bar and handing him back my cup that I was asking for soda water, light ice. That's it. You can go to these places and you can fit right in if you choose to, simply by getting yourself a glass full of ice water or soda water. I just love soda water. I love the bubbles. I love how the texture of it, I like how it makes me feel like there's, and again, this is something I discovered at the very get-go of all this. Soda water sort of has that texture of beer. And so as you're sitting there at a bar and your brain knows everybody's drinking beer, there's a certain feeling that we associate with ice cold carbonated booze going down our throat. And soda water replicates that deliciously for me. And I don't need non-alcoholic drinks or any of those other, those, what do they call them, virgin cocktails. Just give me ice cold soda water all night long and I'm good. I know some people, even in the tribe, who like non-alcoholic beverages. Go for it if that's your bag. If that's your jam, then get on that jam pony and ride it all night long. But you know what's good for you. No one else can tell you what's good for you. I know some people who don't feel grounded enough to taste a non-alcoholic beer because it reminds them too much of beer. So you got to figure that out on your own. Where do you feel strong and where do you have your strength? And then number 3, that there is a darkness to the night, and even more so in the early morning. It is all fun and games until addiction drives you down a path that you can't just turn around and walk yourself out of, right? Dopamine is that desire. It is that craving. It's what got the cave people to leave their safe little cave back in the day and be able to go out there in the face of danger and find food. Right? It is what created that craving. It is what allowed them to muster up that courage to go do those things. It is the epicenter of your craving. It is involved in the reward processing and motivation. When we experience pleasurable or rewarding outcomes, dopamine is released. It reinforces the behavior associated with those rewards. Right? But now we have imbalances in our dopamine signaling over the course of years of being an addict that leads to impulsive behaviors, because now we're seeking immediate rewards without considering the long-term consequences. When dopamine is in charge too much, that's that instant gratification. That's that lack of impulse control. When we think about serotonin, it's mood regulation. It's emotional processing. Serotonin influences impulse control. When we have good, adequate serotonin levels, they are linked to better impulse control. Low serotonin levels can contribute to impulsive behaviors and the difficulty in delaying gratification. So when I talk about a darkness to the night, it is people who literally have been burning through their serotonin and dopamine all night long, going from this seeking of this lack of emotional balance, right? Because when you're wasted, like you want, to be yelling and screaming and laughing and and it's just like somebody's like, let's go play pool, and you're like, yeah, play ball. Let's go to the dance floor, yeah, dance floor. Let's go stand here and talk to the wall because we're tripping on acid, yeah, talk to the wall, tripping on acid, right? Our serotonin is just completely fried, and then the dopamine attaches itself to the reward processing. It is the reward processing and motivation. So we get that craving for food. As cave people, it motivates us to leave the cave to get the reward because we want our bodies to feel full and nourished, right? Then we go off and we find ourselves an animal that's of a adequate size for us to kill, and then go back and let's hopefully in this metaphor, this analogy that the cave people have found fire. So they get to kill the animal and they get to come back and they get to cook it up delicious medium with a nice hollandaise sauce. And so they attach this, go out and hunt, motivate ourselves to go hunt. The hunt brings us back delicious food. And now we have attached dopamine, these neurotransmitter receptors to this. Now, when we get hungry, dopamine gets released. It is the craving force that gets us out. It reinforces the behavior of hunting to seek the rewards of feeling full. Now, how does this backfire on us? Here you go. When we are operating within our limbic and reptilian system, right? Again, reptilian mammalian, it's that first brain. That's where aggression, that's where motivation, that's where our emotional balances come from. Now, all of a sudden, we have attached this dopamine, this craving system, to a drug or external substance, alcohol, drugs, the whole kratom, all of these things. Hell, RoboCough, those pills that it seems like a lot of the young kids of the day. God, saying young kids of the day makes me sound old, but it's like they're buying this shit off the freaking internet and they're going off and gobbling down 20 of these things so they can feel like they're tripping. All right, this stuff gets attached inside their brain to whatever the motivation is leading you toward. For a majority of us, we have an imbalance on our emotions. We're trying to mute something. We have things that have happened in our history that bring us some level of sorrow, and we don't even have to be thinking of them for them to come. It's just like an undercurrent. Think about it like a really deep river and how the base of the bottom of the river will have a different current than as you work your way up. Right? So you have this current. You may not even be thinking about something that happened to you at 7 years old, but it has become an undercurrent for your entire energetic expression. And you want to mute it. You want to push it down. You don't want that to come bubbling back up to the top, because now the suffering is even more intense and you're experiencing it through your own eyes, and you don't have the tools yet that equip you to work through the suffering, to work through the trauma, and be able to release that so that you can, release that heavy weight you've been carrying around. So you go after these drugs because it wants to mute your emotions. That's the dark side. There is a dark side of all of this muting of one's emotions. In the morning, everybody wakes up, and guess what? It didn't go away. But in fact, the behavior from the night before could have just actually heightened it, made it actually feel worse. Now our dopamine, we've burned through it because we've allowed it to motivate us towards the addictive substance all night. The serotonin was released, further attaching our behavior to that substance because it brought us some joy then. Sure, it may not be bringing us joy at 8 in the morning while we're smashing of a hangover, but certainly later on that night, when we start getting the craving for it, we've depleted our serotonin. Now we lack impulse control. We're seeking instant gratification. Best way to get ourselves back to balance is to get back on the alcohol and drugs. How many of us can remember a time where it's like we wake up in the morning and just have a beer or two just to try to get back to balance, just back to even. We weren't getting back to even, but we had convinced ourselves that this alcohol or this drug was what was going to get us back to some level of homeostasis, of balance. And it doesn't exist that way. It just continues to drain us over and over and over again. And the darkness that I saw, was happening as people's eyes go from being, aware to just like there's like a shine to somebody's eyes whenever who they are just sort of kind of goes away. And if you haven't noticed this yet, you will whenever you're around people who drink copiously, is that there will be a version of them at the beginning that is just very much them. And then how many ever drinks or uses of the drug that they prefer get into their body, all of a sudden it's like a glassiness goes over their eyes. And you can tell they're just not the same person that they were. And the darkness that I see in the night is that happening to hundreds upon hundreds of humans in a very small, very short amount of time. So I'm like, holy shit, this whole street just glassed over in the last hour. And then you see, of course, the garbage and the filth the next morning and the stench, and you realize it's like, at one point I'm walking down the street and I'm just like, wow, that smell. It's the Boulevard of Broken Dreams, which is what they call Las Vegas Boulevard or Hollywood Boulevard, depending on if you've lived in either. But certainly this street, it's like where hopes and dreams go to die. On Bourbon Street, the stench, and it's sorrowful, and there was a darkness to it that, just like the Venice Boardwalk, and just like Keys, and there's a place in Dallas called Deep Ellum. There's a place in Atlanta. If anybody's ever been around Atlanta, they would know. There's a place in Tampa that has a lot of drinking that goes on too. A lot of cities will have that street where a lot of alcohol and drug use goes down. And there's sort of like, that's the area where you go and it smells a little off and people look a little sad. And Bourbon Street just takes that and multiplies it by 1,000. And I felt very blessed to have experienced Bourbon Street through the eyes of sobriety and recovery. I do remember the times I was there for 2000, Mardi Gras. We had a chant, Mardi Gras 2000, and then it was 2001 Mardi Gras the next year. And I mean, we're talking just so much. Oh, the excess. And to be able to experience it differently now, stable, grounded, in a happy relationship, happy with myself, it was a very different experience. And what I saw others lacking with their impulse control and their seeking of the instant gratification, it was a very warm feeling I had inside of me that said, I have my impulse control. I'm not seeking instant gratification. Yes, watching a woman sit there and pour 6 Jaeger shots for the people next to us, I'm not going to lie. My brain was like, man, Jaeger, because that was sort of if the sprint to the blackout wasn't happening fast enough, Jaeger and Irish car bomb would make it happen. And watching other people do that, I'm like, oh, I know where they're going tonight. Straight to glassy-eyed town. And it was an experience, y'all. It was an experience. And I just I'll close on this. If you feel like you are white-knuckling it through your sobriety right now, if you feel like you have been doing this for, 7, 14, 21, 35, 42, whatever amount of days. Hell, you could be at month 6. You could be at 2.5 years. You could be at 15.5 years and still feel like you're counting days and white-knuckling it. I cannot stress enough that nothing is going to change about your life until you're ready to change your life. I'm not saying that you got to move out of your house. I'm not saying you got to move across town or move across the country, because your environment can change, but everywhere you go, there you are. I've said this to like 30 people in the last 2 months. Everywhere you go, there you are. So just changing your environment doesn't change shit. Trust me. I dropped out of multiple schools trying to make quick changes. I left city after city and house after house and friend group out of friend group thinking, okay, well, if I just do this, if I go do improv, those people won't drink too much. Nope, found the drinkers there. Well, if I just go do stand-up comedy, surely those people don't drink too much. What the fuck was I thinking? Those people drink more. Well, if I go over here to this community, well, maybe they won't drink so much. Nope. Always found the drinkers. So if you're white knuckling it, I cannot stress this enough, that you are going to have to make humongous changes. You're going to have to sacrifice what you have been comfortable doing for all these years in favor of creating an entirely new existence. Yes, some of the people may stay the same. Your home may stay the same. I stayed in that same apartment that almost killed me. I stayed in that thing all the way up until COVID, and I moved in with my girlfriend. But I was in that house. Day one of my sobriety was the same bed I woke up in the last day of my addiction. It wasn't something that I could just snap my fingers and change. I was in a very good rent-controlled apartment a mile away from my job. Like, changing that would have not made things better. It would have made things more complicated. And the last thing I needed was complicated at the time. I needed simplicity. You are going to have to do things that you may have never thought yourself willing to do. It might mean driving a long distance for a meeting. It might mean cutting off friends that you have been bosom buddies with for decades. It might mean a lot of things, and only you will know what those things are. But I'm telling you, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your job, whether it's the way you talk to yourself, whether it's the standard of your habits, whether it's your environment, it could be where your furniture is located in your house. There's a lot of things that you might feel compelled to change. And there might be some things you're digging into the ground and saying, no, I shouldn't have to change this. I should be able to be sober and still do this. Then you can. Just like I told myself I would still go to bars, I would still go to clubs, I would still go to live music. I was not going to stop going to my favorite Florida Gator bar just because I was sober. I was like, no, I will figure this out. But for the first 6 months, I didn't go out in public other than to go to my job and go to the gym and the grocery store. I did not go places where they were just flinging drinks over a bar. The first time I ever stepped foot into a live music venue was month 6 when I went to the Wrigley Field with all my old college friends to see the Grateful Dead do a 3-day run there. And they all knew that they were showing up to a sober Jesse. And they all were more than happy to gather around me and be that protector if I needed it. But I didn't. Because what I saw there was the same sorrow that I saw on Bourbon Street. A bunch of people plowing through beer after beer and drink after drink and joint after joint and hit after hit, trying to chase a dragon they were never going to catch. Missing half the show because they spend a majority of the time just trying to get more and more high. But subjective to their perspective. They do them, I do me. But I was willing to make changes and sacrifices, and I cannot stress enough that there are going to be things in your life that you're going to have to decide, is this something that I have to give up right now in order to continue my sobriety and actually begin to grow and heal? Because the white knuckling is a real thing, but so is the pink cloud. And we can live in a world where both exist, hell, sometimes in the same day. But we've all felt that darkness. I'm getting shivers when I say that, so I know I'm going somewhere strong right now. We've all felt that darkness of hitting that line at 3 a.m, emptying out our bank account at 4 a.m. at an ATM we had to walk 2 miles to get to, just so we could get another bump or another hit or another bean. Maybe we haven't all done something like that, but a lot of us can relate to some kind of story where we lacked that impulse control. And well after when we told ourselves we would be in bed, we were trying to figure out how to scrounge up more money to keep going. We have pushed ourselves to the brink because of addiction. We have sacrificed our lives, and in many cases our trajectory that was whatever it was when we were younger completely skewed a completely different direction because of these vices. And now we find ourselves at this threshold of a whole new life, and the way we behaved in our addiction, it can't be the same way that we behave in our sobriety and recovery. If it means walking 10,000 steps, if it means eating broccoli for a week, whatever you have to do. Hell, I've told people, look, if you want to sit there and gobble down Twix bars because that helps you not freaking crave heroin, then gobble down the Twix bars. We'll worry about the Twix bar habit 3 months from now whenever you're celebrating 90 days without heroin. I'm looking for you to not be on heroin. Twix bars are the least of our worries right now, which is why some people gain weight when they quit their addictive substance, because we turn to sugar, because it is the most powerful drug on the planet. Make no bones about it. Sugar is the most powerful of all the drugs. It can take you in its grips just as fast as you think that meth or that heroin or that cocaine could. But I'm not worried about the sugar right now. We can worry and contend with that one later. I'm thinking about what is it you can do right now to stay off your drug of choice. Whether it be alcohol or a drug, whatever it might be, you're going to have to make major changes. And if you're trying to hold on tight to who you used to be, thinking that whatever you're holding on to is the core of who you are, I cannot begin to stress enough to you that when you pull back that veil, hell, the shroud of addiction, what's on the other side of it with sobriety and recovery, so much about who you can become over there, over here, where I'm standing, is amazing. And you'll look back one day and you'll think, why was I holding on to that past me so fervorously? Fervorously? Feverishly. When in reality, what I was holding on to wasn't even real. I was plugged into the matrix and now I'm free. On Bourbon Street, there's a lot of people that are plugged into the matrix, and it breaks my heart for them. And I hope one day they find what I've found. I hope one day they find what you found. And if any of those people had ever approached me and said, look like you're doing it a different way, what's up with that? I'd have been much more comfortable talking about that than somebody asking me why there wasn't booze in my drink. Because me and alcohol, we don't get along anymore. That's my show, my friends. 52 minutes. Fuck, damn it, son of a gun. I was not supposed to go that long. I've got some great episodes. We're going to dive a little bit more into the triune brain. We're going to get a little bit more into the dopamine, serotonin. There's a lot of other neurotransmitters that are screwing with us. I tried to make this show really powerful and impactful because there was an emotion I took from Bourbon Street that it's going to live with me for a long time. It really helped me reframe a lot about what I'm going through right now and seeing it through a different perspective. If you love this show, if you find it helpful, please spread the information. Please tell people to come find me, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Pandora, whatever it is. Let more people know, because the more people who know, the more people who can know. And it's with this knowledge that we then can take on the power of action. And there's nothing I'd like more than to be able to hand somebody else a bucket of water to help somebody else they know who's lit themselves on fire with addiction. Let's go out there and let's see whose lives we can change today. Go be amazing. As always, if you want to ask me any questions, jessemogul.com/askme. You just can fill out a form over there. Let me know what's going on. And of course, I would never argue with somebody rating and reviewing my show on one of those apps, because then more people know I exist, and that's always helpful too. As always, my friends, inclusivity over exclusivity, the power of positive energy, release and flow. Every day is the best day of our lives because we wake up sober, when we wake up sober, especially on Bourbon Street. Shout out to Sunshine. Glow on. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.